Hi, my name's Mike Griggs. This is a 3D World tutorial on the basics of Mash within Maya. I'm just going to take you through how I put together this quick scene. If we just move into perspective mode and just bring everything in. And so what I'm going to do is show you how Mash can be used as a procedural modeling generator and not just as a basis for the amazing motion graphics that it has become accustomed to. We have a range of houses, trees and cars and road, all procedurally generated with Mash, which can then be animated. So let's begin. Okay, so let's start using Mash to build our scene. I just want to quickly take you through the basic elements which I've constructed for the scene. I have a ground plane. I've also got some quick house models, two of those. Let's just move that back. I've got some tree models, again, two of those, and I have a little element of road, and finally I have a car. Okay, so all very simple. Just basic geometry. There's a couple of things when using Mash that's worth bearing in mind. First one is your pivot points. I'm just going to hide everything, hide houses and road and car. I know there's a quicker way to do this, but oh, I didn't want the trees. It's the houses I want. So Shift H, back, there we go. Right, so if we just select this house here and double click on Edit Pivot, and I'm just going to make sure my vertex and just move that down to the base. That's pretty much where I want it, and I'll just do that the same on the other. Just move that there, that's great. Mash uses these as generation points, so wherever the pivot is the main point for where the Mash elements will grow from. So it means that there shouldn't be any elements going below the ground. You can control it with a pivot point, you can control it with groups, etc. But whatever way suits you best, it's entirely up to you as you work your way through your scenes. So now we've gone through the models, let's create our first Mash network. I'm going to create the road first, so let's just press the Mash button up here and we have created our Mash network. We can see in our Mash editor, which is also available here to bring up if you don't have this in your UI panel. And we have our very first Mash network. The thing to bear in mind with Mash is that Mash is hiding the original object. It's still there. Nothing's been lost, but it just hides it and it creates a new object called a repro mesh, and this is geometry which Mash creates on the fly. So it's a bit different than, say, other digital content creations, motion graphic systems where you're always working with the same object. Mash is creating a brand new geometry object, and we can rename this, so road, and that goes through all the various elements. Mash 9 road repro mesh is renamed, and so everything is kept nice and tidy. This Mash road distribute, this Mash 9 road distribute element controls the number of points and how the various elements are copied and applied within the rest of the Mash network. So here I'm increasing the number of points. We've got various elements within here. We can add more nodes. Repro, we'll come to that in a little bit. This is the number, this is to do with what components are within this specific Mash network in terms of the original bits of geometry. But if we just want to add a curved road, how do we do that? Well, I've made a curve earlier, and so what I'm going to do is go into my Mash element and just drop down and add a curve node. And so now if I just drag in with the middle mouse button, oh, it's already there. I must have already had it selected when I pressed the curve node button. We can see that that's already started to have a bit of an effect on our mesh network. So if I increase the number of points up to that, oh, it's kind of following a shape, but it's not doing very much. So let's increase our step, which is to do with the full length. And yeah, all that's gone weird. Why has that gone weird? That has, because I have not zeroed out my distance x. And there we go. We have the beginnings of a road, but we've got a bit of a gap. That's fine. Just back in our distribute node, let's increase it up to 120. So to animate something, the best way to do is to use a offset node, especially if we're working with just basic scale, move, and rotation. So I'm just going to set my offset scale to there, and as you can see, that's changed all the various elements within my mesh network into a nothing. Nothing is there. So let's add a fall-off object. This is a bit of jump. This is a new object which mesh has added, fall-off mesh 9 road offset, and we can move this, and as you can see, it affects the road. And we can animate this, we can scale it, we can do whatever we want. But the sphere is a brilliant shape, so I'm going to change it to a cube. We could also assign a mesh to this if we wanted to, and use that as our element which shrinks our road. Just bring that in. I'm just going to increase the inner zone size. That's better. And so now if we were to animate that, you can see that's coming on and off and on. I'm also going to show you other parameters within here within the offset node. Say if I wanted that to start at 5, yep, you can stepping up. One thing that I forgot to mention in regard to this road network, as you can see, there's a little element here where it's just popping on and off. That is because I have not stop my animation speed down to 0. There we go. Nice static mesh. The curve node moves elements along its length, and so that's what was causing that little popping. So let's move on to our next mesh network, which is going to be our houses. So let's show those. Shift H. There's our 2 houses, and so I'm just going to select those 2 elements and create mesh network. Again, mesh 10 houses, our distribute node, there we go. But we're only seeing 1 house, and that is because we need to add a ID node. And with that, as you can see, we've got an ID count of 2 because it's recognized that we have 2 elements, and there's our houses. So if we increase our distribution node, and here we can, oh, our pivot points are slightly off. So let's fix that. Let's just show our houses again. Let's make sure. Yep, both those elements. Sometimes what you need to do with a mesh element is, before you create it, is to bake the pivot. There we go. Everything is now lined up. That's perfect. Okay, so we can hide those 2 guys again. And right, so I want these houses to follow the curve again. So how am I going to do that? Well, we're just going to do it exactly as we did before. We are going to create a curve node. This time I'm going to middle mouse button my curve in because I didn't have it selected. Again, distribute node, we've got that issue with the X, so let's do that. Curve, we're going to drop our animation speed and increase our step. We're going to just change our time step variation a little bit and distribute, maybe create a bit more. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a random node. And what this is going to do is just allow a little bit of variation in my housing types. So that is here. And let's just tighten we don't need it anything Y. Let's just bring those in a bit more. That's quite good. And just adjust our scale a little bit, just to give a little bit variation. But I think we could potentially do with some more houses, so let's do that. And again, with our curve, let's just see, times. Yeah, that's starting to look quite interesting. Okay, you may have spotted the fatal flaw, which is that houses on a road don't really work very well. So how do we move that? If we were to go to our houses repro mesh and try and move it, nothing happens. So that's quite annoying. But thankfully, Mash has a way of dealing with that, and it's called the transform node. So we add a transform node, and now all we need to do is just transform that. Now we could just put in the positions, and that's fine. So if I wanted to move it 20 to X, that's fine, great. And we can rotate, but there is an even better way of doing that. Here is a NURB circle, which I created earlier, and I'm going to use that as the controller now. So bring that in, and there, all of a sudden, we can use that NURB circle to control our Mash network. Great. Okay, so we've got those houses on that side of the road. That's looking really good. And now I want some more houses on the other side of the road. So instead of making another Mash network, not a Nash network, I don't know what that is. Let's create a replicator, which duplicates all the points, all the nodes, sorry, up to that point. The order of these nodes can be very critical. So that's what I've done. Is I'm going to 1, and we're going to do our offset position to there. Okay, that's good. However, the only issue I've got is that the houses are the same on each side. But again, thanks to the power of this ordering system, if I put my ID node to the top, there we go. We have random all the way through, because the random element that the ID node is selecting from the distribute node is now happening after the replicator node. So that has given me my small random elements. And again, if I wanted to animate this, we would just add another offset node, and let's again change the scale to -1, -1, -1. And again, let's just do a bit of rotation this time. But the great thing is we can just use the same fall off that we created before, middle mouse button, drag that in, and now if I move that back and forth, yeah. And again, and what I'm going to do also with this, just save this, is add a spring just to give a little bit of motion graphic-y bounce. So I've got my, I hope you can see. Let's bring that out. Oh, I know why that's being a bit silly. If I no, I thought the invert might be affecting it, but it isn't. So if I pull that back, see them just bouncing on there? That is all to do with the spring node. And you can increase the spring strength, do whatever you want, but can add just a little bit of extra animation, which can be really useful. So I hope you can see how powerful Mash can be in procedurally generating lots of random objects. Also, we've just shown how we can bring in the fall-off object that we created from our previous Mash network to animate this one as well. And let's move on to our next element. Okay, so we've got our road and we have our houses. Let's just, if we just go in here, we can tidy this up a bit. So we've got, well, in fact, we're going to be doing trees in a second, so we don't need that to be green. Oh, or orange, because we've just done that. Red, that's fine. So let's add our trees. To do this, first of all, I'm going to unhide our ground. There we go. And it's worth noting that I've already done a little element with the ground. If I just move the color material channel to none, you can see I've just painted a vertex map on here. Black is where I don't want the trees to be, and white is where I do want the trees to be. So if I just go back to color material channel, ambient diffuse, that's just to paint a vertex map. All we need to do is, if we just go back to our none, paint vertex tool, and then just like that, and control to invert it just like a standard paint or sculpting tool. Diffuse. Okay, so let's bring back our trees. Big tree, small tree. Oh, they're hidden within the group, so show hide. Okay, so just as before, select our elements and Mash 11. Call this tree. Now, there are various ways to spread geometry across other bits of geometry. One of the easiest ways is the way I'm going to show you with the distribute node, but another good one that has just come is with the world node, which can modify geometry's appearance over age, and is really a good way of applying geometry in a more naturalistic way. But for what we are doing, I'm just going to use the good old-fashioned method of the Mash distribute node. So if we put our distribution type down to mesh, and again middle mouse button, our ground mesh into input mesh, that's great. We're only seeing our 2 trees, so let's just increase that, and as you can see, they are not going anywhere near our blackened area that we painted with our vertex map. And I'm going to use our up vector. We can push them up along the normal if we wanted to. We don't want it to calculate rotation, but as you can see, we've only got our small tree, and if we go to our repro node, you see we've got small tree, big tree, and the 0 and 1 here is important. If I just add an ID node, there we go, at ID node, ID count 2, and we have our big trees and our small trees. So just to sit those in a little bit more, I'm just going to use a transform node. And just minus 0.5, oh, too much, minus 0.3, and that's sitting in the side of the mountain a bit better. Again, you can make this a lot more refined. Another good one that we could potentially use is the placer node, where I can just add meshes as in how I want. There are many different ways to add variation to your scene. And if you don't want to see a node on, you can just switch it off, which is a really useful little tool, and one of the reasons why the Mash editor is really handy. Let's just add a bit more random variation to our forest. I should hide that at some point, but there we go, random nodes. Okay, so I don't want my position in Y to be affected. Position X, I don't want my position really to be affected at all. Rotation Y, that's quite good, and we'll just add a bit of variation on our scale. I don't think there's that many trees. Let's add some more. Let's go up to 500. 500. There we go. And again, as you can see, Mash and Maya all nice and very quick, and really responsive viewports, which is lovely. And again, if I wanted to animate this off and on, I would use the same system that we use for the houses by adding the offset, but I think you've got the general idea of how that works. Okay, so let's create our final element, which is our car. So I'm just going to unhide that, Shift H, there we go, there's a car. Again, our pivot point for that is set at the bottom. The only reason it's lying a bit off the ground is that the group is slightly higher off the ground. That doesn't matter if I just create a new mesh network. There we go, mesh 12. Yeah. But we're going to use the same principle as we did at the beginning with the road, but this time I'm going to show you how the curve node can animate. So if I just add a curve, and again, our one element, and that's one of the great things about Mesh, is the fact that you can reuse elements over and over again. So let's increase our step, distribute node, probably don't need that many cars, but again, move that down. And if I just let that animate now, the cars just move along. And that is because the curve node, stop that, always starts with an animation speed. And so we can increase that. And we can also give that a tiny bit of variation. So some of the cars will be a bit quicker, or the distances will be shorter between cars. And we can there we go. If we increase the velocity random, the cars are now moving at different speeds. Let's just switch off our tree. In fact, let's just, with our tree, just cut down the number of distribute nodes so we get a bit more smoother playback. There we go. So if we go back into our curve node, oh, we need to stop the animation. If we go back into our curve node and let's just slow down our animation speed. There we go. Nice and slow. And if I, yeah, some cars are slower now, some cars are faster. And again, if things are dragging you down, just as I showed you, Mesh is completely interactive. You can just go back into various elements and add it. So if I needed that to be ready for render for 500 elements, that's great. But just for the purposes of previewing work and for quick animation feedback, that is all that we need to do. Again, if I wanted to animate these cars coming off and on, that would be with the offset node, as we demonstrated before. But I hope that you can see I've only just scratched the surface of what's possible with Mesh, and you shouldn't just see it as a potential tool for motion graphics. It's a hugely powerful procedural modeling tool which can be used, as we have done here, for simple scenes, complicated scenes, foliage. The possibilities are endless. So this is Mike Griggs for 3D World, and I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial.